Hi there, this is Adam West from the Federation, and this is a short video to help with completing the Federation's National Regulatory System Self-Assessment Tool. I'm going to cover what is the self-assessment tool, why is it useful, where do you find it, how do you complete it, and finally where to get help if you need some further assistance. The tool has been designed to help Aboriginal community housing providers to prepare for registration under the National Regulatory System for Community Housing. Each organisation is encouraged to self-assess their readiness to meet each of the performance indicators under the National Regulatory System. And what this will let you do is to identify any gaps, record any actions needed to meet the gaps that you've identified, and also to record useful sources of information. And this will give you a complete picture of how ready you are to apply for registration under the National Regulatory System. You'll have an action plan that includes the evidence that you already have and any areas where there's more to do. It's important to remember that the Federation's self-assessment tool isn't the application form itself, and it doesn't need to be submitted to the registrar, but it has been developed to mirror the requirements of the National Regulatory System. We've developed it on a standard Excel spreadsheet so that Aboriginal community housing providers can change it to make it as useful as possible, for example, by adding additional columns. And the registrar has developed lots of useful resources for organisations interested in applying under the National Regulatory System, and you should look at the self-assessment tool alongside those resources, and they can be found at nrsch.gov.au. So where do you find the Federation's self-assessment tool? Well, you can find it out on our website at communityhousing.org.au, and then you navigate to the green tab and it's under the Resources for Aboriginal CHP section, and you can just go and download it from the Resources section. So I've now opened up our Readiness self-assessment tool. This is the front page that you'll see when you open it up. And you'll also see that there's a series of tabs along the bottom here. The instruction tab gives you some helpful hints around how to get the most out of the tool. The action summary is a very useful tab because this is where any actions that you have recorded is presented back to you as a summary, so you can use this tab as an action plan for getting ready for the National Regulatory System. And then each of the other tabs is lined up with the performance outcomes under the National Regulatory System, so tenants and housing services, housing assets, community engagement, and so on. I'll just open up one of these tabs just so you can see what it looks like inside. So let's use this performance outcome 1, tenant and housing services, as an example of how you can follow through the self-assessment tool and collect some information about how you think you are travelling towards meeting just one particular performance outcome. So if we start off, I'll just show you a little trick here that I think makes it a little bit easier to navigate the self-assessment tool, because there can be a lot of information on every page. So if you just go to this arrow here and select a particular performance outcome that you're interested in working through, in this case performance outcome 1A, if you just click OK, it just shrinks the information on the page down to the performance outcome that you're interested in looking at. So we'll work through this as a practical example. So we'll look at the performance requirements under performance outcome 1A, the performance indicators, the thresholds that the registrar is looking at when making regulatory assessment, and also some examples of evidence that may be appropriate in this particular case. So performance outcome 1A is all about determining and managing the eligibility, the allocation and termination of housing assistance. And the performance indicator that we're looking at in this case is that the provider makes information about its tenancy management policies and procedures available in a variety of formats. The thresholds that apply here are that all tenants and applicants receive information to enable them to make informed decisions and to understand the decisions made by the provider, and also that those policies and procedures are applied so that there's no significant or ongoing or repeated failure to treat applicants and tenants fairly and transparently. So some examples of evidence that would apply in this case include these. So that you have tenancy management policies and procedures, including information on how eligibility is determined, how properties are allocated, how rents are set, how complaints can be made, how appeals can be made, and how tenancies can be terminated. And the kind of the format that that evidence might exist in might be in brochures, in booklets, in information kits that are provided to applicants or to tenants and residents and to other stakeholders. So the process for making a self-assessment is really that you think about this, all of this information here, and whether you think that you've got examples of evidence that are listed here, or in fact alternative sources of evidence if you think that you've got something existing that might be more appropriate. In this case, it's fine to submit other types of evidence. So you just look at the requirements here, and then you simply use this little arrow here to give yourself an assessment of how you're travelling towards meeting this particular performance outcome. So it's a traffic light system, so you can have met, which gives you a green, harshly met, which means you've got some evidence but possibly not everything, or you can give yourself a red for a not met, where you've got very little evidence available. So once you've given yourself a rating for this particular performance outcome, you can do a couple more things that we recommend. If there's some follow-up work needed, you can just record some information here in this actions cell, and if you know of any resources available, either resources within your organisation or from external sources that are relevant to this particular performance outcome, you can use this space here to record that. And as an example here, I've just recorded a couple of sample actions. So in this case, let's say that the organisation is going to revise its applicant kit to include up-to-date information about eligibility and how to apply, and also to include some information about how to appeal a decision. And in this case, there are a number of useful resources available. AHO has a number of relevant policies here, the Aboriginal Housing Access Policy, Eligibility Policy, the Housing Services Guidelines and the Housing Services Policy Framework. And the Federation also has a policy template around accessing properties for tenants. Once you've gone through all of the performance outcomes step by step, you'll start to be building up a good picture of areas where there's more work to be done, and also the areas where you already think you've got sufficient evidence. And then you can go across to the Action Summary tab. And what that does is it summarizes everything that you've recorded on the other tabs, particularly the action columns and the resources available columns, as well as the overall score that you've given yourself, the overall rating that you've given yourself. And that'll give you a really good overview of where more work's required, and also where you've met lots of the evidence requirements. So it'll give you the an overall template for, or an action plan for the work that you'll be doing in getting ready for the national regulatory system. So finally, if you'd like any further help, either about how to use the self-assessment tool or on what other resources are available, please do get in touch. You can call the Federation's Aboriginal Specialist, Paula Coghill, or me, Adam West, on the number here on the screen. And you can email Paula at this email address, or email me at adamw@communityhousing.org.au. Thanks for listening, and hope you found it useful.